At dawn, the city breathed hot dust. The bricks of Meereen held the night's furnace close, and as the first light folded over the eastern walls, it came away in shimmering veils, the heat and color drifting like dancers on the breeze. Daenerys Targaryen stood barefoot on a terrace of the Great Pyramid and watched the sun pick its way along the roofs far below. She had never quite learned the map of this city that wished to be hers and would not be. Its alleys changed with each story told in them. Its courtyards shifted shape with every dead man laid upon their tiles. The Harpy's headless body cast a long shadow over the market even now, though the bronze carcass lay toppled and silent in one of the palace gardens. Ivy was already creeping along its flank, and a small bird had nested in the crook of a forearm where once a gilded mask had been riveted. When the wind struck right, it hummed faintly, a low mouthless sound that haunted the stairwells and water galleries of the pyramid like a vow half-kept. "You are awake early, your grace," said Missandei of Noth, approaching with the soft clatter of a silver tray. The girl's feet were as quiet as hope. She set the tray down upon a low table. The clay pitcher beaded with dew had been wrapped in cool damp cloth. Dates lay fanned like dark petals on a wide plate of painted tile. A small knife shone beside flatbread still warm from the kitchens. Skahaz Mo Kandak waits in the water hall. He did not send word ahead, but he asked to speak without delay. "Then let him wait a moment longer," Daenerys said. "We will both think better if our tongues have tasted sweetness first." Her throat was dry with a thirst that was not the desert's. She ate a date and let the sugar dissolve slowly, the pit a hard truth she rolled between her teeth before laying it aside. Beyond the railing, a boy drew water at the plaza cistern, the counterweight of the shaduf creaking with a complaint as old as the city. He had a blue scarf wrapped around his head and very careful hands. Her city, her people, her insistence. Below and to the west, smoke rose from the kilns. It smelled of clay and of something bitter, the ink that wrote the names of the dead upon the small tablets set in long walls in a district called the Street of Remembrance. She had walked it once at sunset and made herself learn 3 names, speak them like prayers. They had become a steady drum in her head, a refrain to the new ones that came each morning with the dawn reports. In this district, a wine cellar was found with his throat opened like a pomegranate. In that district, a child of 7 years had vanished and returned without a tongue. In her own stables, a man had left a bag of copper coins below the manger of her mare, and a hand was later found in a jar. Skahaz Mo Kandak preferred to arrive when the day was still an unmade bed, to turn back the linen and show her where the stains lay. It suited him to speak in cold corridors, and if no cold remained in Meereen, he made it with his voice. She broke the flatbread and gave Missandei the larger piece. "Sit with me. Tell me something about home." Missandei blinked, genuine surprise making a ripple through her composure. "Of Noth, if you wish. The butterflies are large," Missandei said after a moment. "As large as a man's face. When they fly together over the orchards, they cast a shadow and the fruit ripens early under it. We would watch them from the roof of my mother's house. The leaves were heavy with oil, and I liked to rub one between my fingers and smell it. Sometimes my brothers would bring me a shell from the shore, and I would hold it to my ear and hear the sea even when I could not see it. The shell held a small, cold world. I could make my breath warm inside it, but the sea remained." Daenerys closed her eyes to be in that world a moment, to feel the oil-dark leaves and the weight of a shell in a child's hands. She opened them and beheld the pale plume of dust where 2 horsemen had begun to gallop along the city's outer road. Their path was a ragged silver seam stitched across the morning. "Send Skahaz in," she said. Missandei rose without another word. When she returned, Skahaz Mo Kandak, the shave pate, moved like a wedge of shadow under the screened arch, skull-shaved as always. He had chosen a mask from among his brazen beasts that morning, a long-nosed fox with ears pricked to listen. He held it in his hand rather than wearing it. The mask gave his hand a weight like a weapon. "Your Grace," he said, bowing as if the movement might break something in his spine, and perhaps it would. "They kill openly now. The Harpy sons gather in the alleys as daylight fades and sing their little songs, and men who sell onions cross the street to avoid them and pretend they have heard nothing. Last night, a burly man with a scar across his nose was found in the forecourt of the Temple of Graces with his own knife in his heart and one of their coins in his mouth. He had been selling me names. They mean to terrify us into silence. That is always the first harvest before they begin the burning. Daenerys wiped her fingers on a napkin and drank water that tasted of clay and faint lime. Skahaz's words pooled around her and showed her face in broken light. "You spoke to me of patience," she said, "of letting the trap fill. You told me that when a weasel steals into the granary, it is a foolish householder who lights a torch at once. He should wait until the grain is sweet in the weasel's teeth and then strike the door shut. I did. I am weary of waiting." The admission felt like a stone she had carried beneath her tongue being set down on the table between them. "How many more men must I let them kill in my city while I tender patience like a candle?" "You would not have patience if you were not queen," Skahaz said. "You would have knives." He smiled in a way that made every word to follow sound as if blood were its ink. "You were born with both. Use them together." "Speak plainly," Daenerys said, though she suspected already. "Use the wedding." Missandei drew in a small breath. Skahaz turned the fox mask in his hands. Its eyes were empty brass holes that made the mourning behind them glitter oddly. "Your Grace has asked me to bring you names," he said. "Not the low men with quick hands. The high ones whose whispers carry blades. I have gathered a handful. I can gather more, but they do not meet in caves, Queen. They meet at tables and they eat well at them. The Green Grace knows every such table. Your cousin Hizdahr Zolorak has sat at them since he first learned his name. His wedding brings them all together, draws them into the open where fools love to stand. If we wall up the alleys, they will come. If we flood the souk with music and wine, they will come. If you promise to open the pits and spread the carpets and let the blindfold be removed from old delights, then all the little hawks will fly. But hawks can be hooded again. We choose the falconers." He unrolled a scrap of linen. Names pricked it like stitches: Paul, Gazine, Cora. A smaller hand had added others in a darker ink. Reznak Mo Reznak.
Margas Solorak.
Beneath them the simple word, Grace. "Not Reznak," Missandei whispered. "He is foolish but not cruel. He loves gold more than he loves blood." Skahaz shrugged. "He will sell one for the other, and I count that cruel enough." Daenerys reached for the linen and did not take it. She imagined each name as a face, each face as a house with a gate, each gate as a place where a child might pause to watch butterflies. There were no butterflies in Meereen, only gilded masks and the smell of vinegar where blood had been washed away. She had promised herself 1,000 times to rule like water over hot stones, to endure, to make smooth. But water could drown as well as soothe. She could not be only one thing and still be queen. "How would you have me use the wedding?" she said at last. Skahaz's eyes were little black grapes that never ripened. "Invite them, seat them, lock them, cut away their masks in a room where their women cannot watch them die. Names are most easily pried from men who have been stripped of their letters." "Who would have the key?" Daenerys asked. The question was the shape of a decision, and Skahaz saw it. "Your Grace," he said, bowing again with that same brittle sound. "And I will stand at your right hand, and Grey Worm at your left, and old Ser Barristan like a sword held point downward in the floor between you." "Old?" came a voice from the arch. Barristan Selmy had a gift for arriving half a moment after his name had been invoked. In his white cloak, he looked less a man than a tradition walking. He came forward with the small stiffness of knights slept in armor, and yet there was the sure-footedness of a dancer in him still. Even his age moved lightly. He bowed, and when he straightened his hair lay more neatly than any hair had right upon waking. "Forgive me," he said. "I knocked upon the pillars and no one answered. Skahaz Mo Kandak, you look well as a fox. And you look as a blade made from winter," Skahaz said. Barristan's mouth tightened in something that was half a smile and half a habit he had trained his face into long ago when men made jokes at feasts. "I have news, Your Grace. 2 Carthene ships sailed at midnight. They carried 100 young men with them, all of fighting age, all in silks they had no right to. They had been seen often in the street of silk before, in masks that were too fine and cut too carefully to be bought by their purses. The Harpy takes her sons overseas when she can. Let her, Skahaz said, better her brood flaps at other shores. It tells us something, Barristan said to Daenerys. Those who can flee will flee. Those who cannot will come to you and pledge themselves to peace and to your new husband and to the gods and to whatever word they think we wish to hear, so long as it is a word and not judgment. If we make any sudden move, we will drive them to ground or to sea. We must pluck them so quietly that the first Harpy caught in the net does not cry out. And the wedding? Daenerys asked. Barristan hesitated. He had known kings. He had stood close enough to hear their hearts go wrong. Feasts, he said carefully, are where men drown in their own appetites. And yet they are also places where blood runs loud. If we shut doors, your grace must be certain of every man who holds a key. I have served enough kings to see their spiced wine sour in an instant. The hall roars and then becomes as a throat that is swallowing something that is too large for it. If Hizdahr is innocent, we risk painting him with his cousin's crimes. If he is guilty, we risk putting our neck beneath his hand while we offer him a ring. Missandei's fingers tightened slightly over the tray's rim. Skahaz said nothing. He stood as if he were listening for something in the far halls of the pyramid, some drum or soft step that would argue the case for him. The pits, Daenerys said. The word tasted of ash. He asks that I open them as part of this peace. He asks for blood to be public and for the songs to be old again. The Harpy wants her amusements back. Skahaz's mouth curved in disdain. Open them with rules that shame them. Chain cruelty to your leash. Make them watch you hold it. Barristan shook his head. Even chained, a pit is a hole into which a city can fall. Daenerys looked at the names again and saw only the small movements of mouths. She rose. The sun had climbed and set its hand upon the pyramid's highest stone. Below, the market had become a square of light broken by shade and noise, the bartering as intricate as carpet patterns. A child had climbed upon the Harpy's fallen hip and was trying to pry a flake of gilding from an old seam. She felt a tenderness for him as sharp as fear. We are done with waiting, she said. We will plan. If we must use my wedding like bait, we will see to it that it tastes of honey until the teeth close. Skahaz bowed again, this time like a man accepting an execution date for someone he despised. Barristan bent his head, and when he looked up, Daenerys saw the prayer in his blue eyes and the iron lid that kept it from spilling out. Missandei said nothing, but when Daenerys reached for her hand, the girl let her own be held. Later that morning, in the long water hall where thin threads of water slid down green tiles and made it seem as if rain had been taught to move with grace, she spread out a map. It was not a map of the Bay of Dragons or of the lands beyond. It was a plan of the Great Pyramid's feast halls, drawn by a careful scribe with colored inks. The doors were inked in cinnamon brown, the windows in a pale green, the curtained alcoves in a powder blue that made the corners seem like winter in a city that had never known it. Skahaz stood on one side of the table, Grey Worm on the other. The commander of the Unsullied held his shoulders as if the air itself were his armor. He had no love for plans that included doors shutting softly behind men, but he had seen worse. This door, Skahaz said with a fingernail upon the parchment. 2 brazen beasts behind it. When the third song begins, they will close it and set the bar. They wear masks of boar and crocodile. These 2 windows, there is a drain beneath them, a passage to the ash pits. It is narrow. A child might pass. A fat lord will not. Post 2 of my men there with their own bars. The musicians will be ours for the evening. They have worn masks since boyhood and will not complain if the brass grows heavy. Grey Worm's voice was sand sliding through a fist. Unsullied will stand upon the dais. 5 only, Skahaz said without turning his head. We do not want our lambs to scent wolf beneath the perfume. Grey Worm permitted himself no look of disdain. He thought, there is no perfume in the world that can turn a wolf into a lamb. He said, 5. And Ser Barristan will have his place near the queen, Skahaz continued. And I mine. The green grace will sit in the high seat beside Hizdahr. No, Daenerys said. She will sit at the long table. She will not sit beside my husband. My queen, Skahaz said, careful now. It may be better to keep her close where we can put a hand upon her sleeve. She will not fear when she sits high. She has not learned fear, Daenerys said. Let her learn distance. It was decided, then. The green grace, Galaza Galar, would be seated 2 places down from the high dais. The men Skahaz named would be scattered so that they might have to rise and crane their necks to see one another's signals. Reznak would be behind the wine, with 2 tasters who owed Skahaz debts they could not count upon their fingers. Hizdahr's cousins would be pressed into the second rank of seats where their pride would keep them planted and their sense of insult would make them talk too loudly. And this, Skahaz said, tapping the square marked for the serving antechamber, is where masks can be exchanged. Exchanged. Daenerys looked up. Skahaz did not blink. There are masks that belong to the Harpy that are not brass nor leather, your grace. There are faces, but there are also our masks. They have grown accustomed to seeing a Harpy upon a brow and fearing it. Let them look and wonder. The brazen beasts are Meereen's new face. But for one night I would have some of them wear other faces. The sons of the Harpy are proud. They look at their likeness and see safety. Let them, for one night, mistake us for them. No, Barristan said from the arch. There are honest confusions that end in honest deaths. There are less honest ones. Skahaz's tongue touched his teeth. Your grace asked for a trap that closes all at once. And you will give me a slaughter in which my own die upon my own spear points, Barristan said. I have seen such nights. Who made the plan does not weep as he should. Daenerys raised a hand, palm down, and the men were quiet. She thought of a marriage bed as a net of vows as threads. She thought of a curtain drawn across a doorway. How thin a line lies between a room for feasts and a room for punishment. She thought of Hizdahr, who smiled often and with his lips more than his eyes, who had spoken to her of peace as if it were a tapestry he might drape over the blood until it ceased to smell. No exchanging, she said. Masks will be worn as they are. We will not put a false Harpy over an honest man's face. I will not send my beasts to hunt one another in the dark because we have chosen to make a darkness. If this is to be done, it must be done in a light that is cruel and clean. Skahaz did not argue. Grey Worm inclined his head the width of a knife blade. Barristan let go a breath that made no sound. And the signal? Skahaz asked. Daenerys looked at the square marked for musicians. There is an old song they sing to the Harpy, she said. A parade song. I have heard it in the street when men march under masks. It sounds like the tapping of knives against bowls. The shy maid's lesson, Skahaz murmured, flat with dislike. Yes. When they begin it, Daenerys said, you will take the doors. The bars will go down. The beasts will step behind those men whose names are written on your linen. No one lifts a knife before I speak. If any man rises, my Unsullied will lay a hand upon his shoulder and ask him to sit. If he will not sit, he may lie. Skahaz's smile had the brightness of fresh-cut metal. As my queen commands. You will have a line prepared to take our guests to a certain chamber beneath the pyramid, Daenerys said. It is cooler there. The stone remembers the river before the city was built. We will remember that too when we sit and listen to men speak plainly of debts and of masks. If there is to be justice, let it be spoken in a place where the air itself has patience. He rolled the map. Hizdahr will balk. Hizdahr will be told nothing of doors and bars, Daenerys said. He will be told of music and of wine and of the gift of peace. When he had gone, the water's whisper remained, a small voice learning a word's shape. Missandei came and stood beside Daenerys without touching her. You will marry him, the girl said, not a question. Yes. He smiles in the manner of a man who has learned that smiling can make the walls move. Yes. Do you think he wears the mask of the Harpy in his heart? I do not know, Daenerys said. It loosened something in her to say it. I have thought I knew many things, And many of those things have turned out to be stories told to myself to keep my hands from shaking. I will marry him because it will stop some of the killing today. I will set a trap because it may stop more of the killing tomorrow. I will keep the dragons chained because Missandei looked at her with eyes that could hold an ocean without drowning. Because you are trying not to be the only thing the world will let you be. Daenerys laughed, low and brief, almost a cough. You are too wise, she said, because it felt like a benediction to say so. The day of the wedding drew itself together like a fist. The Great Pyramid was combed and powdered and dressed like a bride itself. Carved figures along the stairs' flanks were cleared of dust with soft cloths. A small child followed the cloth with his eyes and tried to memorize the motion. On the north face, tapestries were hung that had been folded and guarded in vaults since the first Harpy had been hammered into bronze. It was a city's memory being unrolled, and it smelled of cedar and long-kept dye and the disappointment of moths who had been given a home for so long and then made homeless. Daenerys let herself be taken apart and put together again by a small army of servants. Her skin was washed with water cooled by chunks of night kept in deep jars. Her hair was braided and threaded with filaments of hammered gold that felt like new veins being laid beneath her scalp. Her nails were painted with a resin that made them sting and then shine. When they set the cream of fig and sweet milk upon her cheeks, she thought of the first time she had let handmaidens teach her to be a woman in another city. Another dawn, a girl like a blade that had not yet been tempered. Not too much, she said as a veil was lifted and held before her. I must see. You will be seen, a handmaid murmured, and in that was an oath and a hope and a fear that could have toppled walls if it were given a trumpet. She wore a gown dyed the green of the river far from the city, where it is young and unwieldy and tries to go everywhere at once. The silk clung and then released her with each breath. A thin belt of beaten copper circled her waist with small raised harpies along it. She felt their tiny claws press against her skin and did not know if she should scorn them or take comfort in their familiarity. Dragon Queen, she thought, and then to herself, city wife. When she went to the dragon cell, she went without her train. She dismissed all but Missandei and Ser Barristan at the door. The air grew heavy and then quick, and there was a tang of something like burned almond and like the inside of a new broken nut. Regal and Viserion crouched in the shadows like enormous questions. Their eyes followed flame from torch to torch, and the light that fell upon their scales had its own ideas about color. They smelled of meat and of stone and of the old vows that live in bones. They will not like the noise, Barristan said softly. They will not like the chains, Daenerys said more softly still. She moved closer until heat pebbled her skin in imaginary scales. Viserion opened his mouth a fraction and made a small sound like a man in love waking. She put her hand upon the chain where it lay against his neck, and the link moved, a bright ring shifting against white as milk. I will set more chains today, she told him. I will lock doors. I will ask men to speak into the cool dark where their mothers cannot hear them or pray for them. I do not know if this is the right road through this bad wood, but I am going to walk it. The dragon watched her with a slit pupil wider than a coin. She imagined dangerous game, that there was in it no judgment and yet an understanding older than judgment. She did not believe dragons judged. They ate or they did not, flew or would not. If there was an ethics to dragons, it was the weathers. On the way back up, Barristan said, "We will stand as you commanded." "Thank you," Daenerys said. "It is a terrible thing to find oneself praying for a good trap," the old knight murmured. "I have served kings I prayed would not have any trap at all, because they could not be trusted to remember who had planned it once they stood upon the sprung door. If I seem a man who sees too many roads ending in bad weather, forgive me." "You are forgiven before you sin," Daenerys said. "And after." He bowed his head and they climbed. The procession through the streets was a serpent that wanted to taste its own tail. Meereen had 1,000 faces that day. There were women in shells and men in paint. Boys in horn masks and girls scattering flower petals that became bruised under their own softness and stuck to the sweat on soldiers' calves. In the higher balconies, old men leaned forward and let their eyelids be the sails of boats that had not left the harbor in years. Hizdahr zo Lorak wore blue finer than sky and a smile less convincing than a beggar's curse. He came to her like a rumor that had been told too long to be disbelieved. He bent over her hand and breathed something that could have been devotion or study. He was beautiful the way a good coin is beautiful. Precise, correct, pleasing to the touch and to the weight. If all you needed was change, he would do. The green grace drifted behind them on a cloud of incense. She made a point of not touching Daenerys as they walked, as if to protect her from contagion. She looked upon the crowd's raised hands with the same expression one might have when considering the direction of wind. Inside, the air changed in the way air does when many flowers and many meats are asked to share it. The tiles had been rubbed until they held the reflection of feet as if they were shallow water. The musician's corner had been garlanded. The drums sat as patient animals waiting to goad others. The high table shone with copper and with the bright, ridiculous plumage of a roast bird the size of a small mule. Wine jugs wore collars of hammered tin that made them seem like soldiers sent to guard mouths. Daenerys took her seat and knew where each door was without turning her head. Grey Worm's presence made a small gravity to her left. To her right, Skahaz was a mask upon a neck and a knife upon a thought. Barristan stood behind like a history that had stayed to watch its own repetition. Hizdahr sat beside her, and the arrangements of his face did not change even when the small boy who bore the salt stumbled and almost set the dish upon the queen's lap. He caught the dish in a motion that was almost graceful and kept smiling while he returned it to the table as if he had not moved at all. "Syvas is simpler than this," he murmured. "I do not play Syvas," Daenerys said. "Then I will teach you," he said. "I will teach you and lose, and by losing I will learn when you will play to win." She looked at him and watched the light in his eyes and saw the small shudders. "I do not believe you have lost much," she said. He inclined his head. "No one believes I have lost enough." Servants moved. Music began, stopped, wandered, returned as if it had gotten lost in the corridors and needed to be led by the hand back to the hall. Daenerys watched the men Skahaz had named take their places. Gazine with a chain heavy as a sentence around his throat. Korra, whose lip bore a long white seam from a boyhood knife fight. Marga zo Lorak, who had once tried to sell her a dozen children for her kitchens and been told to leave with his hands. Reznak Mo Reznak flickered about the wine like a fish that believes it is a dragon. The Harpy's old song did not come at first. Instead, the musicians gave the city its polite face. Lullabies made for merchant wives and little marches for shopkeepers who liked to feel larger during their evening walks. Hizdahr applied himself to the food and to making her see him eat it. At a signal far at the back of the hall, the raising of a candelabrum like a standard, the plates of locusts were brought. They came upon a long tray worked with seashells, piled high as an altar. Their brown shells gleamed with honey and with something else, something darker and more eager to shine. Hizdahr had told her once that a man who could eat locusts without a blink could sit a horse in a sandstorm. A small lie that wanted to be a proverb. She did not reach for them. She watched. It was a stillness that traveled like quiet lightning from her hand through the table. Men watched men watching the queen and decided whether to be watching or to be eating. Skahaz's fingers rested upon the hilt of a small knife as if they had been married there. Barristan did not breathe. Missandei stood back, head bowed, and listened for something that would not be a song. A taster she did not know took one, bit, chewed, swallowed. He blinked twice and did not die. Another took two and laughed to show he was not afraid. Daenerys looked to the Green Grace, who was explaining a genealogy to a dowager who needed to be told why her son had been placed where he had been placed. The Grace took a locust without interrupting herself and let it enter her mouth with the intimacy of prayer. She chewed carefully and swallowed and did not die. "Your Grace," Hizdahr said, his voice shading toward amused. "They are better while they are hot. Honey becomes a widow quickly." "Let it be a widow," Daenerys said. He smiled as if this were daring. He took 3 locusts and ate them as men do on floors, with a little relish made from relief. No one died. The honey grew widowed across the hall. Daenerys thought of poison and of rumors and of how a trap should not be baited where children can see it. She thought also of rumors Skahaz had brought and of how much a rumor wished to be a truth when it curled beneath a man's tongue. The locusts were eaten by men who had come to watch a queen become a wife and perhaps a convenience. If they had been poisoned, Meereen would have heard the harpy laugh the way a woman laughs at a child who has broken a toy. They were not, and yet the room gathered itself closer, as if a sigh had been heaved by 100 chests at once and then tucked away. The second song began, lilting and sweet, a melody about a woman whose eyes were like the river's mouth at dusk. Daenerys could feel Skahaz waiting beside her, a tense absence, like a door already closed in a mind. She put her hand upon the table, fingers spread. She imagined pressing the wood down into the tile until the table's legs were as useless as old spears. The second song died away. A drumbeat like knives against bowls began. The old parade rhythm. It tapped along the long bones of the hall. There was a flutter at the back. A servant, perhaps, moving too quickly. A man whose courage had too much wine inside it, making his tongue larger than his mouth. "Now," Daenerys said, and her voice did not rise, and yet it seemed to her that the stone in the walls listened. Skahaz raised his hand, and it moved like the shadow of a hawk upon a field. Grey Worm took one step. The brazen beasts behind the southern door drew the bar without sound. At the northern door, the boar and the crocodile did the same. There was the briefest of silences, as if the hall had forgotten how to breathe, and then not noise, not yet. The sound of many men reminding themselves how to be still. Grey Worm's men upon the dais looked no different and became more frightening for it. One of the named men, Gazine, laughed too loudly and raised his cup. The laugh was a rope thrown into the air. No one needed a rope. It fell. The green grace set her cup down as if she meant to listen. Hizdahr's eyes slid to Daenerys' face and did not leave it. "My lords," Daenerys said, and the hall swallowed the title as if it had wanted always to have it pronounced thus. "We will not dance yet. We will not go to the pits tomorrow. Your fathers were masters, and your fathers' fathers were masters, and their fathers built this city upon the backs of men who did not want to carry stones," she went on. "It is hard to teach a hand not to close when it has been taught to close since it first learned the shape of a cup. But I am your queen. I will teach your hands to open." Someone at the back tried the door and found it did not open and became a small child again very quickly and laughed too loudly and said he had mistaken the door for another door. The hall made room for his lie. The drums continued their low parade. "I have written names," she said. She did not look at Skahaz. She did not have to. "When I speak a name, the man who wears it will stand. He will step toward the dais and he will allow a mask to be taken from him if one is found beneath his tongue. He will not be harmed unless he runs. If he runs, he will be tripped. If he does not stop after he is tripped, he will be stopped. If he has brought a knife into this hall, he will remember that he has brought it, and he will wish he had not. If he is innocent, he will sit again and eat my bread and drink my wine and be given 6 bolts of cloth dyed green and silver, which is the color of mercy and of the river running toward the sea. If he is guilty, we will go to the room where the stone remembers coolness, and he will teach me what masks are made of." She took the linen from Skahaz's hand without looking at it. It was a small piece of the city, heavy as a brick. "Margas Zo Lorak," she said. A man rose with the slow interest of a snake raising its head enough to watch the foot that has entered the grass. He tried to laugh and found that laughter was further away than he had thought. He came forward 3 steps and stopped. He spread his hands. His rings winked at him, unhelpful. It began that way. The first name gave permission to the second, and the fourth seemed inevitable because the third had already forced the hall to realize it was not there to eat. There were murmurs and small flares of foolishness, and Grey Worm put a hand upon 2 shoulders and they sat. Once there was a knife, and then there was a knife on the floor, and the knife remembered it had been made by human hands and good iron and decided it would rather be picked up later by a cook and used as it had meant to be used. Resnak stepped forward smiling and complaining and ended by sweating and then crying and then smiling again in the way men do when they realize humiliation is better than death by every measure except for their prides. The green grace watched like a woman watching a river flood a field she had told the field would flood. Hizdahr watched Daenerys and learned where to place his hands upon the table to make his thumb look honest. When Gazine's name was spoken, there was a stiffness that ran through the left side of the hall like a fever through cousins. Gazine did not rise at once. A woman at his table made a sound as if a small fishbone had lodged in her throat. Skahaz moved a fraction. Barristan breathed in a way that made breath a shield. Gazine rose at last, and in his eyes Daenerys saw the quick inventory of the room's doors. He took a step toward the dais. He reached behind, slow as prayer, and his hand found nothing. He took another step. He swallowed. He took the third step, and then there was something like a leap through his face, some animal deciding too late to be an animal, and he lunged. The space between the lunge and the thwarting of the lunge was very small and full of sound. Grey Worm's staff found the hollow of a knee in the same motion that a brazen beast's hand found an elbow. Gazine folded like a moth into a book. He made no further mistakes. When the list was done, Daenerys looked again at the men who had not been named. They looked back, 100 mirrors each failing to give her an honest reflection. "You will go home," she told them. "You will think about your hands and whether they should be open. You will listen at your gates and decide whether footsteps should be allowed to pass into your courts or not. You will do this not because I am your queen and command it, but because you have seen a thing and cannot become innocent of it." There was a silence. The old parade song had given way to something like rain on stone, the musicians having chosen mercy for themselves. The doors were opened. The first men did not move. The second men did. And then everyone remembered being a child again, and how sweet escape tastes even when you have not been pursuing it. The hall became motion. In the cool room beneath the pyramid, where water lived in the walls like old dreams, Daenerys sat and listened to the men whose names had been called. Skahaz stood to one side in a posture of religious attendance. Barristan leaned against a pillar that had been carved 4 kings before the Harpy had learned to wear bronze. Grey Worm stood exactly as if he had been placed there by a careful hand who expected to return and find him unchanged. The first men lied. They lied in the little, tired ways liars lie in. This was not the mask they wore, they said. The masks they wore were dress masks for festivals. The boys who had done the cutting had been boys, and boys must be boys, and it was wrong, yes, of course it was wrong, but wrongness breeds like lice, and should a man be blamed for every louse in a city? They became eloquent when their fear made them feel clever. They became silent when Skahaz asked them the names of boys. "Who gives you your coins?" Daenerys said. "Who tells you which alley to stand in? Whose wife is tired of the noise of knives?" They gave her names, and the names were sometimes true and sometimes offered like crumbs to turn a dog up another path. She had learned dogs from a boy who had taught Drogon to take meat from his palm gently. She had learned that a dog can be fooled by a false throw once and not twice. She remembered and asked the same question again in 2 hours' time and found that one lie had a frayed edge that could be pulled gently until the cloth opened. When the green grace was brought in, she looked upon the room as if it were a poorer sort of temple. She did not sit until told. She did not look at Daenerys. She looked through the space left over around Daenerys and studied the water's slow seeping upon the stone. "You sat me at the long table," she said, and there was a little girl in the way she said it, a little girl whose favorite toy had been given to a cousin. "I did," Daenerys said. "It was close enough to hear you." Galaza Galaire's mouth was a straight line. "Your grace has made a show of justice. You will make a show of mercy now. You will set these men free. You will tell the city that peace has returned and that the queen has a husband whose line is long and whose house is good. You will tell Yunkai that you are not a storm, as they say, but a good wind that will fatten their sails." "I will tell Yunkai what I choose," Daenerys said. "You will tell them this, or you will see the pale mare gallop a second time upon your thresholds." The Grace's voice took on the cadence of instructing a child. "You have broken the back of a custom, and you will find a spine in every piece. Ask her about the locusts," Skahaz murmured. "Make the small talk that saves cities." Daenerys did not turn. "You knew the locusts would be served," she said. "They are always served," the Green Grace said. "When the city remembers its memories, it remembers its tongue." "You ate one," Daenerys said. I ate too, the Grace replied, to show the women that it is not unbecoming. Daenerys waited. Silence in the room belonged to her, and she let it walk where it would. There was no poison, she said at last. No, the Grace agreed. Yet you watched me not take one. I watched you, yes. And you look pleased now that I say there was no poison. I am pleased you did not use a rumor as an arrow, the Green Grace said. Arrows lodge, rumors pass. What if the rumor had been true? Daenerys asked. Then my city would have vomited its gorge all over its carpets. The Grace's nostrils flared. And I would have told the women that it was not becoming to vomit. Skahaz made a sound like laughter without performance. Daenerys leaned forward. I will not kill you, In this room, she said. You are not a knife. You are a sheath. I do not know who you have held. I do not know whether you have warmed knives to men's hands out of love or out of duty. But I will not let you sit beside me and teach me which cloth to use when blood is spilled. I am not of your temple. I am not of your city's old way. I will make a new old way if I must. The Grace studied a crack in the tile near Daenerys's foot. You will leave, she said eventually. That is what women like you do. You have all the qualities that make staying intolerable. You will leave us with your new old way and with the chains you have forged with the best intentions. And we will break them or we will decorate them until they are called bracelets. Perhaps we will call them yours to remind ourselves that we did not choose them. Perhaps, Daenerys said, perhaps I will stay. Men will come from across the sea, the Grace continued, as if speaking lines heard in a dream. They will bring with them gifts of siege and of sickness. They will kneel and then rise with knives in their hands, because that is kneeling's purpose in cities such as ours. You will think you can stop all of it by opening a door. The door will be a pit. You will decide whether you prefer to watch men die in a circle of sand you can see or in alleys you cannot. I am deciding, Daenerys said. The Green Grace looked directly at her for the first time. I know, she said. It is a sight. After they had taken the Grace away, Barristan rubbed his knuckles as if they hurt. I do not know if she speaks as a liar or as an oracle, he said. Sometimes those are the same, Skahaz said. Not always, Daenerys said. Oracles are harder to hang. They worked into the evening. Daenerys kept her hunger like a small animal folded against her ribs. She learned the taste of the cool stone's breath and how it became warmer when many men waited long under it. She sent 3 men away with 6 bolts of cloth each. She sent 4 men deeper into the coolness, where there was a door whose key gray worm wore beneath his tunic. She sent 1 man away with a message to his wife, that he was sorry for loving his city more than he had loved her, and that he had not realized until the queen had asked him what love was for. When at last she rose and the room rose with her, Skahaz always straightening as if a chain had been pulled through him, Barristan easing his old bones with a soldier's courtesy to pain, Daenerys felt the day's length in her throat. She went out into the courtyard that smelled of hibiscus and of spilled wine, and the city's night wrapped her in its coarse shawl. Above, the stars had the indifferent brightness of coins too high to ever be reached. Hizdahr found her there, his soft shoes tapping politely against the tiles as if to warn her of his approach so that she might compose herself into a woman in time to receive him. He had removed his ceremonial collar and looked younger for it, or only less finished. You trapped a part of my city today, he said, and there was admiration in it, or the performance of admiration, which is all that admiration is in public places. I did, Daenerys said. I would not have chosen to do it in that hall, he confessed. I would have chosen an alley, but then I have always been a man for the side door. The front door is for gods and queens. Does your side door open into the same room? Daenerys asked. He smiled. I like to think it opens into a room that can still be left by another door if a man keeps his head. Do you keep yours? She asked. Most days, he said. He inclined his head. You are frightening when you are kind. Then I am properly dressed for my new city, she said. He came closer, daring or simply doing what men do when they wish to test whether a queen is a woman made of a softer metal beneath the crown. I will not ask what you will do with the men you have taken, he said. You will not. No, he lifted a hand and let it hang between them, and when she did not take it, he made the gesture of setting it upon his own breast instead. I will ask you what you will do with your husband. I suppose I will learn him, Daenerys said. And if you do not like what you learn, I will learn it anyway, she said. And I will not ask a priestess to tell me if the stars bless it, because I have watched stars and they bless whatever men decide and call their blessing proof. He laughed. It was not unlovely. You have closed doors today. There will be more doors. Let me help you keep some of them open. How? She asked, truly curious despite herself. By teaching you who owns them, he said simply. By telling you when a door is not a door but a curtain and who sits behind it. By showing you the courtyards where men will nod and then not nod, and telling you which nod matters and which belongs to a man whose neck is sore. Am I to trust you? She asked. He looked at the night and at the handful of stars caught in a water basin's surface as if they were jewels a thief had almost taken. I do not know, he said. I hope you will trust the part of me that wishes to live. And the part that wishes you were not married to me? Daenerys asked. That part, he said, and this time his smile was a confession, is small as a locust. It makes a great noise in my dreams, but it is small. The part that wishes you were a woman I could make into a story my cousins could live with is larger, and I am trying to starve it. Then eat more locusts, she said. He bowed and left her with the night and the scent of flowers that would rot by morning. When she went to the dragon's cell again, it was late enough that the torches had begun to weep. Regal shifted and let out a sound like a bell that does not wish to be rung. She told them what she had done. She told them where she had placed mercy, and where she had placed caution, and where she had put her fear down on the tile and dared it to be stepped on. She did not know if the dragons understood anything but the motion of her mouth and the way her hands moved when she was being brave or when she was pretending. That might have been enough. It must be. They would sit in judgment on the morrow and on the morrow after that. The doors had opened, and the city had seen that they could be shut. The green grace would turn to her women and teach them how to sew a new kind of veil. Men in the alleys would ask themselves whether the knives they had been sharpened for their own throats after all. Out in the black water, ships' lanterns swung like lazy fireflies, and a gull dropped a small fish back into the sea because it did not like the taste of it. In her chamber, Missandei brushed out the gold filaments. Each draw of the brush felt like a choice smoothed. Daenerys watched her in the mirror. The girl and the queen and the small river of light that ran between them. We did a thing today, she said. Yes, Missandei said. Will you sleep? I will try, Daenerys said, and did not. When she closed her eyes, she walked again through the long hall. She felt the way silk whispers when a man tries to move too quickly in it, and the way a full goblet trembles when a woman who has expected to avoid being seen is suddenly named. She heard the old parade song and knew it for what it was, a tune men had taught themselves to be brave to and which had become a trick to open a trap. She saw Hizdahr in blue and the green grace in white and Skahaz in brass and Barristan in white again, older than the tiles. She saw Grey Worm, whose face had been made into a place where men came and placed their fear gently and were told to go home. When she opened her eyes, the room had the gray of a city before dawn. On a table, the linen with the names lay folded. She touched it. It felt like any other cloth, rough where the ink had wrinkled it, soft where the scribe's hand had made a mistake and licked his finger and smoothed. She smoothed it again. Outside, a shadoof creaked and drew water into the morning. In the street below, a boy with a blue scarf would be walking with careful hands. He would be older by a day. In her heart, a little room opened for that. Somewhere in the middle night, a messenger came with sand in his hair and a letter in a tube under his arm. He was brought and kept waiting until the sun rose because Skahaz had taught everyone that night was for lying and day for listening. When at last Daenerys broke the tube and unrolled the small scroll, the letters were careful and steady. Yunkai would come. Volantis had coughed and sent a handful of its sickness across the sea in chains. The pale mare had been seen on the road to the east again, wearing a driver's whip for a tail. The siege would be a siege of many things. Daenerys nodded as if she had been told to expect rain. "Then we will send the cloth," she said. "Green and silver and enough of it to make a visible mercy." Skahaz looked as if he had bitten a lemon and found it a sweet. "Mercy is not a banner. It will fly like one," Daenerys said. "We will make it fly." She sent for Hizdahr and for the green grace and for the men who had not run, and for those who had, knowing they could not attend. She sent for Grey Worm and for Barristan and for the musicians. She sent for the city with her eyes. Above them all, chained in stone and shadow, dragons breathed and shifted and dreamed their dark, hot dreams. The city was a harp that had been broken and played anyway, and she would learn its strings, even if they cut her fingers to blood. Later, when the sun had stepped higher and the flies had begun their work, when Resnak cackled at something that was not funny and made it seem it was, when the green grace folded and refolded her hands, and when Hizdahr stood beside a window and measured the distance to the street below and concluded it was survivable, a woman came to the door of the cool room and stood where one could stand and not be seen. She was small and barefoot and wore her hair long in the guy's fashion. She held something in her hands the size of 2 fists. "For the queen," she said, her voice swallowed by the stone and then given back with a softness that made it holy. Missandei went to her and took the cloth she offered, and when she unwrapped it, a mask lay within, the brass thin as a leaf, the eyes oval and empty, the mouth pouting as if with old disdain. On the inside of the mask, scratched by a hasty hand, was a name. Skahaz took it and did not let his breath out until he had to. The name was not one on any linen he had written. It was a name he did not want to have to bring to his queen because he liked believing he knew all the names that mattered. He handed it to Daenerys. She looked and did not change. No one who watched her could have said later whether she had been surprised or glad or something more costly. "We will send for him," she said, and Missandei's script upon the small sending slip was quick and perfect. When the man came, he would enter the cool room and find the queen and the water and his name waiting. The wedding had been a net. It had closed. The fish still thrashed. Some would be thrown back. Some would be salted and kept for lean times. One large fish, it seemed, had learned to swim under boats and come wherever it wished. Or perhaps a fisherman had learned to sail to both shores. There would be more songs. There would be pits and the pitless. There would be mornings when Meereen's breath was a clean wind and others when it was the stale exhalation of a sick man. There would be the dull knock of the shaduf and the quick sharp of knives against bowls and the low murmuring of water upon stone. A lesson whispered over and over just outside the room where decisions were made. When dusk settled that day, Daenerys went again to the terrace. The city was a kind of fire beneath her. The lamps set out like patient insects making patterns for their own sake. Far away, a flare went up from the harbors where men were making themselves useful in the dark. She had learned in these months that usefulness at night was a confession that could not be made in daylight. She leaned on the rail and opened her hands and looked at them and imagined them as other people's hands and then reclaimed them. The Harpy's toppled body in the garden had collected the day's dust and the night's dew upon it. A child had tied a rag around one bronze wrist. It fluttered like a small flag. The bird that nested in the crook of the forearm stirred and settled and put its head under its wing. Daenerys Targaryen stood and watched a city she would either learn to belong to or learn to leave. She felt the drums hours old in her bones and the cool breath of the stone close by and the warm, animal breath of dragons very far and very near. She let the night lay its hand upon her brow and did not flinch. Later she dreamed, not of pits or of masks or of doors, but of a road along a river, the water bright as hammered silver in the moon, and of many butterflies moving as one body over an orchard so that for a time the fruit believed itself shaded by a single enormous wing. She reached up her hand and the shadow reached down, and for an instant they touched and knew each other, and then the wind changed and the shadow became many small, independent darknesses availing themselves of their right to be free. She woke with the taste of honey in her mouth and did not know if it had come from a locust or from the hand of a friend. In the morning the city breathed hot dust again. The names on the linen were fewer by one. The mask on the table shone with a secret someone else had trusted her with. She folded the cloth, called for Missandei, asked for water, and told herself again that she would be water over hot stones, and also the stone, and also the heat, and whatever else the day required. In the courtyard, a boy with a blue scarf drew water from the cistern, and the counterweight lifted and fell, and the world went on stubbornly making its sounds while queens and harpies and men with knives learned to listen.